And that would be Mr. Nat Cole introducing Unforgettable, that program called Viewpoint.
Here we are.
Personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Today, happily, we leave out the politicians, and that's a good thing. Boy, we'll all be glad when November comes. Some of us are going to lose, some of us are going to win, but we're all going to be glad when it's all said and done. I'll tell you that. Mr. Tom, we always try to start Viewpoint with kudos for somebody or some organization in the community for something. Well, nothing would be more appropriate. We have an organization in community known as Lincoln Area Musical Society, GLAMS. They're having a concert this weekend, this Saturday and Sunday. Saturday at 7 p.m. and Sunday at 2 o'clock. The reason I mention that in the form of a kudo, these people are all volunteers and they spend a lot of money, or a lot of time, and perhaps some money too, but a lot of time invested in rehearsing to give us a good program, and that they do in spades. They just put on to Tim Serby, of course, directs the choral group, and Judy does such a wonderful job with the instruments and the band and so forth. So find some time this Saturday or Sunday afternoon to go out there and support our Lincoln Area Musical Society. And while I'm on music, Lincoln College, you might have heard of that, Judith Kay. They have quite a nice music program out there. We've got a wonderful music program, and to prove that, we're going to put some of that on display this Friday night. We're going to have a jazz concert. So why don't you show up at the Lincoln College at the auditorium there, 7 o'clock. Get there a little early so you won't disturb everybody getting in. You'll enjoy that. These kids, they do a great job, don't they, Dan? Tom?
Yep.
Dan, I'm going to call you your father's name most
It's okay.
And speaking of such things as music, an old fellow I know called me to ask me if I would mention that each Sunday morning on this station there's a program called Sunday Morning Swing, and the guy I know that works on that puts a lot of time on putting that together, and so 96.3 next Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, just before or just after church. No.
Yeah.
Either way.
Depending whether you're coming or going.
Oh, speaking of church, one more, and I'm off. I'm going to turn the mic to you, Mrs. Busby. Your church, Presbyterian Church, the ladies of the church work so hard to put together a giveaway program, and you might want to expound on that, Judith Kay, for families who are in real need. And turned out last Saturday was such a rotten day that they didn't have much action. So you want to talk about that just a minute, Judy Kay?
Yes. It was through Community Action and their Head Start program. And we are going to repeat it because the day wasn't very pretty. You could remember if you opened your door, you could blow into Beeson, whether that's where you were going or not.
Don't forget Burtonview.
Or Burtonview, yes. So we are going to repeat it, and the date is to be announced. So it was a good thing.
Yeah.
And the people that came seemed to be very happy about it.
We don't want to infringe on Tom's time too much, but you recounted an incident on our way up here this morning that kind of spoke to the heart of what that program is about. Would you like to mention that, the mother and her children that were there?
Oh, a lovely, lovely family. And
in dire need, of course.
And they had a need, yes. And it was a mom and her kids, and they were just the kind of family that the world needs more of. She obviously loved those kids to death, and they returned it so beautifully. She was expecting a child, and the little girl found some dresses for the mom, and she said, "Oh, Mom, this would look so nice on you. Do you think this will fit you after the baby's born?" And then they'd help one another. They weren't thinking only about themselves. They'd say, "Oh, look, this would look good on you," you know. And they thanked the people who were working at that end of the business, and they were just really nice people, and I don't think they ever stopped smiling. And of course, that endears someone to you right now.
Yeah, they had to be your favorite customers of the day. Although they were not customers, they were recipients of somebody's largesse, and that's a great program. Those of us who are more fortunate just don't really have no cognizance of the real need out there in this community. This program steps up as far as the clothing department's concerned, helps out a lot of people. We ought to get serious and introduce our guest this morning.
Well, I think before he ups and leaves us.
He's got to pick up and go home.
I don't want to introduce him when he's in the SNP already. That'd just be wrong. Tom McLaughlin is with Lincoln College, of course, in Lincoln, and he's the director of the Lincoln Heritage Museum. And it is something to be proud of. It's just unique. The first time my daughter, Cass, and I saw it, she said, well, this is better than the Springfield Museum. That was her take on it.
Yeah.
And it is, because it's a different type venue. It's so unique. The outfit that came in and did it had some hellacious ideas.
They really did, yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is, and thank you very much for having me this morning. I truly do appreciate it. I try to look at our museum, the Lincoln Heritage Museum, as we complement the Presidential Museum. You try not to be in competition, because several museums, including in Mount Pulaski, in Atlanta, the Postville Courthouse, I think altogether we do a better job of telling more of the entire story of Abraham Lincoln. For instance, at the Lincoln Heritage Museum, we tend to spend a lot of time on Lincoln's life as it was in Illinois, particularly when he was on the 8th Judicial Circuit as an attorney. The Presidential Museum spends an extensive amount of time, obviously, on his presidency, but I feel like when you put the two together, you get a much better idea of a full picture. So, by no means, I try to avoid any types of direct comparison or competition, so to speak. I think we're all doing a good job trying to tell the story of Abraham Lincoln.
Well, that's well put, of course, Tom. But what we have here, and you mentioned right up the street here, a good half mile, Atlanta, that's very modest, but a very amazing little museum they have
absolutely.
up there. Yep. That's really, it's worth the drive up there just to see that.
Yep.
And so we're going to have to talk to the fellow who's calling that radio and tell him that he can't do that anymore. So one forgot that to turn that down. The little museum up here, and then over in Mount Pulaski, they're doing such a good job, and their goal to save that courthouse. What a magnificent goal!
Yeah, they're working really hard.
Oh, they are. Judith and I have talked so often, almost ad nausea, on the air about how these little communities pull together and do such a great job. But specifically to the Heritage Museum, it's interesting. Judith mentioned about the folks who kind of designed that and brought it to fruition. Interesting, they're right over here in our backyard, over here at Rantoul, Illinois, Taylor Studios.
Taylor Studios.
And they're big time. They're known throughout the world for their work.
They really are, and they spend an extensive amount of time with the previous director of the Lincoln Heritage Museum, Ron Keller, and our current assistant director and curator, Ian Mosley, as well as the administration from the college. They spent quite a bit of time designing and developing the entire theme of the museum. So it was quite an undertaking, and we've been very lucky to have a very good partnership with Taylor Studios, and they've promoted the museum as well, and their different marketing materials and pamphlets, and they've been on podcasts and mentioned the work that they were able to do. So we've been very happy with the design that they made for us.
In the event that there's somebody listening, one of the three listeners haven't been there, would you tell us how it's interactive? And
Sure.
it fascinates me as an old adult, and it must really do something for little kids.
It really does. The Lincoln Heritage Museum is 2 stories. The first story is your traditional museum setting. We have over 100 Abraham Lincoln era, Civil War era artifacts that are out. And like I said, when the traditional museum setting, these are the actual artifacts. They're behind glass, so obviously you don't touch. But upstairs is what I feel really makes the Lincoln Heritage Museum unique, where you're actually required to touch the artifacts. Now, these are replicas; these aren't the actual artifacts. But how the upstairs works is you have to somewhat kind of pretend that the elevator. Well, today's April 6th, 2016. Once you take the elevator upstairs, all of a sudden it's April 14th, 1865, and you're standing right outside of Ford's Theater. The Civil War had officially ended just a few days before, and the President and Mrs. Lincoln were looking for a relaxing evening at the theater. Well, as we all know, it didn't quite end up that way. There was approximately, not to give the whole story away, of course, but there was about a 9-hour window between when Lincoln was shot and when he actually succumbed to his wounds.
Yes.
So the theme of the second floor is in that gray area between life and death. Someone could be known to go through what's called a life review, and as the visitor to the museum, you actually get to walk with Lincoln and go through this life review with President Lincoln. You go all the way from his childhood in Indiana and Kentucky all the way through to the presidency and inevitably the assassination. But there are all of the doors open on their own. There's different areas in each of the rooms where you're actually required to touch, for instance, a quilt or an axe handle or a book, a law book, or something to that idea, and that actually helps progress the storyline along. And you'll get to meet people from Lincoln's life and hear stories about Lincoln's life. So the neat thing about it, in my opinion, being on Lincoln College, we were hoping this would be a learning environment. That second floor is what I would call more of a dialogue than a monologue. So you're part of the story. And our goal is when somebody visits the museum, when they leave, an hour, a day, a week later, there's still something they're thinking about from the museum. Something stuck with them. So hopefully they learned something when they were there, and maybe they tell their friends. It's interesting. I've only been the director for about 6 months now, and I like to, when we have visitors come in, particularly to the second floor, I like to kind of be around the elevator when they get done because I love to see the reactions. And they're almost every time people are so excited and I can't believe this is here. This is just such a beautiful thing. And the thing that really stuck out in my head is this is such a well-kept secret. And I thought, well, it's not a secret. Please tell your friends and tell everyone you know. And so while we've increased our marketing efforts, word of mouth has been just the best possible thing. And we've had a significant number of repeat visitors because there's so many things to see and especially experience on that second floor that people want to come back and say, you know what, I want to go through that again. And I think I missed something here. I want to hear this part again and learn a little bit more. So it's just been a wonderful experience.
And go ahead, Judy.
And don't you have some little new twists up there too?
Well, the upstairs is pretty set. We do have a new exhibit on the first floor that's up this year. It's called The Nation's Choice. It's based actually, it's funny you mentioned at the very beginning of the program about the political scene today.
Yes.
This exhibit is actually on the presidential campaign of 1860, which was obviously Lincoln's first presidential term. And our hopes for this exhibit is that it'll spur on conversations of the similarities and differences between that campaign and the current campaign. And we've had not only a significant number of guests, we've had an increased number of guests, but increased number of students from the college as well. So it's really been neat to watch the students learn more and put things together from what's happening today to compare to back then as well.
Now, wasn't that The Nation's Choice? Wasn't that his campaign slogan? Well,
that's the banner we actually have in the back of the museum. That's one of our most prized possessions in my opinion. One of our most prized possessions is we actually have the actual Nation's Choice banner that was made by a dentist in Atlanta, Illinois.
Is that right?
Yep. And it's just this really neat piece. It's of President Lincoln and Hannibal Hamlin.
Is that your dentist, Jim?
No. It was actually his vice presidential candidate. And an interesting thing, actually, mentioning Mr. Hamlin, is that Lincoln and Hamlin did not actually meet until after Hamlin was chosen to be his vice presidential running mate.
How could that? I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. How can that be?
That must have just been at the time. There is some correspondence through, like via letters, and from Lincoln saying, "I'm looking forward to meeting you and running for president with you." Which, in this day and age, can you imagine that the presidential candidate wouldn't have even met their vice presidential candidate before somebody says, "By the way, this is your running mate."
Yeah, right.
So it just seemed that, and Lincoln in 1860 spent at the time the astonishing amount of $150,000 on the presidential campaign.
Oh, gracious.
Which averages out today to about $4 million, which for probably isn't much of a drop in the bucket for our presidential candidates at this point.
They've put up the numbers more than once, and it's amazing. All
really
the
is.
good that could be done in the world with that kind of money, you know?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm waiting for you because I had something to say. Go ahead.
Well, don't you want to say it if you have something to say?
Am I allowed to do that, Jim? Is that all right? She runs things pretty well here, Tom.
Sure, absolutely.
She runs a tight ship too, I can tell you.
Sounds good.
Well,
Yep.
part of your responsibilities, and a major part thereof, trying to find funds, money.
Absolutely.
And there might be some philanthropic soul out there who just didn't know exactly what to do. And if they could contact Lincoln College and have them put in touch with you, you'd be glad to accommodate them.
I would be more than glad to take that phone call.
I don't want to be facetious about this at all. There are some folks who could have their own philanthropy, and did I do that right? And due to legal terms and so forth, maybe they save themselves a lot of money or their family a lot of money by it.
Absolutely. Those would be questions that they would need to ask their tax advisor about, but Lincoln Heritage Museum is part of Lincoln College, which is a 501c3 organization. So there are tax benefits, but again, I would strongly suggest that they talk to their advisor before making a decision. But we do rely heavily on the funding from private donors and supporters, and we have a Friends of the Museum program where we have a newsletter and membership that gets into the museum, and for special events. For instance, when we had the Nation's Choice opening, we actually a week before had a preview for our friends. We also have every fall, and this year it's September 24th, our Grand Soiree, which that is the major fundraiser for the museum. It's a wonderful evening. It's a black tie event. I got a feeling I'm going to need to rent myself a really nice tuxedo for this this year. I don't have one of my own. And it's just a great night. And the funds that are raised go directly to the museum, and they help us with our conservation efforts for our artifacts that are in the museum vault. Helps us with our educational outreach efforts as well. We recently had, just a few weeks ago, 3 schools from District 27 in Lincoln. The 5th grade classes from Washington Monroe, Central, and Northwest schools did a Civil War walk where they actually did what's called a living history program, where they researched characters, whether it would be Abraham Lincoln, a Civil War, a doctor, a nurse, a soldier, a spy, whatever it may be.
Is this prior to their coming, to the museum?
Yes, they did all the research before, and then they came into the museum, and they actually did presentations where you'd have a couple of them in different areas on both floors, and that, for instance, the fundraising helps us. That day is free to the public, and it was just a wonderful day. We had several hundred people come in, a lot of the families of the students. There were students who did what's called a Virginia reel, which I guess is a form of the square dance. There were some students who sang in the courtroom, which was just beautiful. There was a student that played the trumpet, but it was just so neat, because one of the neatest things is to ask them after they do their presentation, what is the neatest thing you learned about your character? And everybody had an answer right away, so they got to learn something as well. And I'm hoping that we can expand this program out to every school in the county. It'd be my goal with such a beautiful museum right here in Logan County. I'd love to have every student that could come in and just see what there is to offer and hopefully learn a little bit.
Well, with your background in music and theater, that's a big help to you as you work with these particular programs. And
it is
to fruition. So.
It is, and we are developing our own living history program as well, where we could have guests coming through, and I may be dressed as a certain character, whether it be General Grant or Judge David Davis or another character, and talk to our guests a little bit in that as the character, and where that's a chance where they may be able to learn something because they're, in theory, asking General Grant a question, and I'll be able to give an answer to the best of my ability. I still need to do quite a bit of research to make sure I have the correct answers, but it's just it's a unique way to learn some things about the Abraham Lincoln era.
Well, let's speak a minute just about our volunteer program, which we're in dire need of more volunteers. And Mrs. Mosley does a great job working with you in concert there. So it's a great partnership. And so let's address that just a minute.
Sure.
How that works, please, Tom.
Absolutely. The volunteers are the true backbone of the museum. Without volunteers, we wouldn't exist. Our volunteers, we have several different things, projects that we're working on, and we're trying to develop more and more projects. Whether somebody wants to just simply be at the front desk and welcome guests and help show them around to different things. We have some of our volunteers that'll actually be transcribing actual historical documents that we have in our vault, all the way to when we have special events such as the Civil War walk we had, or for instance, I want to say it was about 2 weeks ago, we had 130 volunteers from the Presidential Museum in Springfield came to visit us over 2 days.
Oh, how fun!
And that was a super day because we got to learn from them as well. But whenever we have special events or we have different things, research projects we're working on, our volunteers are essential for us to do that. So it's a neat learning experience, and it also helps the museum out quite a bit.
Well, yeah, because we have to. That front desk has to be manned. We're open for the public.
Absolutely.
And you have your responsibilities. You have to be back in your office working.
Yeah, I spend the majority of my time in my office. I'm working on different marketing plans, or I'm speaking to different friends of the museum or supporters of the museum. And Anne spends the majority of her time in the vault working with the research. She's in the middle of a very large inventory and cataloging process of our items that we have.
Which is very laborious, by the way.
Very much so.
Very time-consuming.
It is. And I've learned quite a bit since I've been there. How methodical you need to be, and how detailed and, like you said, process-oriented that is. And we have a significant number of artifacts to go through, so it's quite an undertaking.
Surely.
Well, we're going to take Judith K., we're going to take a short commercial break as soon as Mr. Ash getting ready to switch all the dials and push the levers and so forth. And then we'll be right back with Mr. Tom McLaughlin. We're talking today about the Lincoln Heritage Museum on Lincoln College campus. Go right ahead, James. Right back live in the studios here, WLCN. Our guest this morning on Viewpoint program is Mr. Tom McLaughlin. He's the director of the Lincoln College Heritage Museum. And for those of you who have been in a state of somnambulance while we were talking, we would urge you to pay strict attention to what Tom has to say, because we have a jewel of a museum here, and I want to be very serious about that, not facetious at all. Judith K., you were going to ask Tom a question.
I was going to ask, you do have a little gift shop there, too.
We do, absolutely. We have a variety of different, we have quite a few books. We have actually some beautiful sculptures of Abraham Lincoln. There are some fun different things. We have the Lincoln stovepipe hat for the kids, and
they love those.
They sure do. They sure do.
That's so much fun to watch those kids put those hats on.
And we have the big Lincoln pennies, which is always kind of a nice reminder for me. I grew up about 6 blocks away from where the museum is now, and as a kid, I used to ride my bike on the campus at Lincoln College, and I would go visit Mr. Beaver, Paul Beaver, who was the director at the time, and I remember buying one of the big pennies. And and so it's one of those things. I don't have the penny anymore, but I do remember thinking those were so neat, and spending my $2 to get one or whatever it was, and I thought that was neat when I came back to the museum as director, and I saw that we still sell the big pennies.
You play your cards right. Maybe you could buy another.
I could, I could probably work that out.
I could probably get you a discount.
You must know somebody.
Yeah,
I understand.
I get you a little discount.
Sure.
5-finger discount.
Let's talk about visitors just a minute. I always enjoy when I'm there. I always kind of scan the visitor register, and it's amazing. And I said this ad nauseum on this station. The same thing is true up here at the Palms Restaurant. You look at the people who sign those registers, and you see this Route 66 mystique.
Absolutely.
It's just amazing. And we have visitors, just like up here at the Palms, from all over the world there.
You really do. It's interesting. Yeah, Route 66, because we'll ask, how did you hear of us? Where are you from? And a lot of folks have just begun their trip on Route 66. They started in Chicago, and they're working their way, and we're one of the first few stops.
Yes.
And it's just so interesting to hear their stories about they love the museum, and where are you going next? Where, how far do you plan on going today? And many people will try to do the trip in 2 separate trips because there's so many things to see on Route 66 all the way out to California. But absolutely, it's really neat to hear. And we've had guests, like you said, from all over the world who have come to visit us, and it's just so interesting to hear, especially from an international visitor, their opinions of Abraham Lincoln before they have gone through the museum, just to see what they've learned or what they've learned over their experiences.
I was uptown one time, and I pulled in at the little Busby Turner Parkway there, and there was a young lady standing there with a camera, and she said, "Please, could you move your car just a little bit that way?" And I said, "Sure, no problem." So I got back in the car and moved the car a little bit that way. And she said, "We're doing Route 66." And she said, "I wanted to take some pictures." And she said, "Now it says that there's a watermelon here." So I told her, "Well, that's right there." And I said, "Now, have you been to the college, to Lincoln College, to the museum yet?" "No." "Now, what was that?" So I told her all about it, and by George, they were going to go there right away, too.
Oh, I hope they did.
And I'm sure they did, because they were real excited about the Route 66 thing and the things that were in Lincoln.
Yeah.
Well, excuse me, go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, it's just amazing the history we have in Lincoln and Logan County. And we were actually talking about this before the program, is being that I grew up there, sometimes you may not pay as much attention to things that are in your own backyard your entire life. But the older you get and the more you read and the more I learned about Abraham Lincoln and the impact, the footprint he has in Lincoln and Logan County, it just really shows how lucky we are to be where we are and the different historical aspects of the town and the county.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned that, we don't recognize what is in our own backyard. I've been to the Lincoln Tomb twice. Once when I was a Boy Scout. Now, does that tell you anything?
Well, that was 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, exactly 10, 12 years ago. Anyway, and then a couple of years ago I went down there. With, I know. More than 2 years ago, I had a Japanese house guest. And I took him down there. And it was very interesting, his reactions to that and all. And he said, "I pray." And he did his little prayer.
Oh.
And I thought that was pretty neat. And I asked him when he came out, and he was Shinto, whatever that is, and I do not know. But twice I've been there in my own backyard, you see. And
it's one of those where we have to remind ourselves to take time to enjoy the things that we have to see around us. For instance, today it's kind of a rainy day outside. Seems like a wonderful day to visit a museum. Not an awful lot to do outside, so.
Perfect. No yard work today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, one thing about our museum here on the second floor, there's an aura of intimacy about it that you don't get at other museums. It's just the way it's laid out, the way it's done. And I thought that concept was a great concept to start from his assassination and work through his life backward, and that really was very, very today.
Yeah, and
even though I've been it several times, I can go up there this morning and still be impressed by a certain thing up there.
Well, it's interesting. The museum was not built to handle thousands of visitors in a single day.
No.
Where the Presidential Museum may have been built that way. Our museum, the Lincoln Heritage Museum, was built specifically to have that intimate experience. For instance, on the upstairs, when we do the audio-visual tour, we try not to send more than 12 people at one time up because we don't want anyone to miss anything in each of the different areas. And the second floor actually takes about an hour and 15 minutes, and we try to tell people that ahead of time just so, make sure you're in the right frame of mind, turning the cell phones off and really trying to absorb what's around you. And
not hustle through.
Right. And
we're in such a rush all the time. Our whole lives are a rush. And this is something you want to pay attention to.
Well, you might say that it takes just to go over an hour to go through that upstairs, and you have to be prepared to allot that kind of time to it. And it's worth every minute of it.
Yeah, and it's a time presentation, so you can't go ahead or try to go
walk
back
through it.
because it's dark except for the rooms that you're in at that time. So we always try to warn our guests. If you need to use the restroom, use it ahead of time, and those kind of things, and then just to relax and enjoy the experience.
Mm-hmm. Just go with it.
Absolutely, it's a wonderful story to hear. It's a heartbreaking story at the end, and
of course,
but it's a great story to hear.
You mentioned a little bit ago, Tom, about conservation of the things that you have on the first floor. I'm sure that must take Ms. Mosley a part of her day, too, to observe all the things that have to be observed in order to conserve these things. You can't just be whipping them around.
Absolutely. And I try to leave that specifically to Anne because she's been trained how to handle these artifacts. So I don't want to be a bull in a china shop and walk around and bump things here and there. So, but yeah, and she's just done a wonderful job. But we have items back in our vault and it's not all Abraham Lincoln era. We have items from the history of Logan County, the history of Lincoln College, several different things that have been collected over the last few decades. The actual museum, the Lincoln College Museum, opened in 1942, and that opened based on, in the will of one of our alumni from Lincoln College, class of 1887, Judge Lawrence Stringer, actually had amassed a significant Lincoln collection, and he gave it to the college with the express direction to open a museum. So Lincoln College's museum was actually the first Abraham Lincoln Museum.
Well, he was very into the history of Logan County. He wrote a tome. I'm telling you, the thing is 4 inches thick.
Yeah, so we've been collecting items since the 40s and 50s, and to conserve these items, many times you'll find they'll get an item that has been in somebody's attic for decades and decades.
Sure.
And so then Anne is tasked with trying to preserve the item best we can, and she knows there's different ways to do that, and she has different materials, but that's some of what we use with the money that's raised is for the materials that help us conserve these items.
We might talk about that vault just a minute, Tom. One day Jean was helping out in there, and she came up to my front desk and had me a picture of Lincoln College. I've talked about this before in the air. Lincoln College football team in 1919.
Yep.
And there's my father in the front row in his football uniform.
Is that right?
Those are some of the neatest pictures.
And some of those older pictures now, for instance, at one point in time, they had a bunch of folks out there on display. They have to change those displays to make them fresh all the time, But there was a whole bunch of students and instructors that I knew.
And those are some, and I went to Lincoln College as well. I graduated in 1994, and I love seeing the pictures of University Hall, which, for those who are listening don't know, that is the large building on campus. That's our landmark. That one has actually been there since the beginning of Lincoln College. And there are some pictures from right around the turn of the century that you see University Hall, and it's just surrounded by trees, and that's it. There's no other buildings or anything. Yeah. It's just, it almost looks like it's a drawing, but it's an actual picture. It's really just the neatest thing.
You mentioned vaults and University Hall. Thank goodness there was a good vault in the first museum, because you would not have had some of the things you have today if there hadn't been when that awful fire happened.
Yep.
What year was that? Does anybody remember?
That was right around 1969, and that was in the administrative building. For many years, there were just those two buildings, University Hall and the administrative building.
Yes.
And that one,
and
I believe it burned beyond repair.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know the number of artifacts. I'm sure there were some that may have been lost at that time. I don't know. But I know that it was a very significant fire.
But the vault was so packed with things because the museum at that time was relatively small. And the things that were in the vault were all saved. I remember that fire very well. In fact, a friend called me, and I was sound asleep. It was the middle of the night. She said, "Hi, how are you?" And I said, "Oh, pretty good, thanks."
How are you?
Just call and check on you and see how you are.
Yeah. And she said, "Well, look over toward Lincoln College," and there it was. Oh, I was just sick, and I'm sure I wasn't alone.
Yeah, we all. And there's a lot of history that went for. And I'm not saying the museum. I'm just saying the history of Lincoln College.
Yes.
When a museum or when a building like that goes down, that's a real shame.
It's a shame a youngster who's studying history in school, say at sophomore or high school level upwards. Yeah, history, to most of us, we took it because we had to take it. That was it. It was an assigned subject, and that was that. And boring. Well, you know, you have to get older, unfortunately, to respect some of the teachers that you had. We had one of the finest history teachers in anywhere on that college campus, Donna Lee Bailoff, and Mrs. C.A. Bailoff. She made history come alive at the college history level. And those of us who studied under her were suddenly got a new and inspired appreciation for what history was.
And later, Paul Beaver, that you mentioned, taught there. And I was always kind of, come see, come saw on history. You know, I thought it was interesting, but I didn't have time. Mostly come see.
Okay.
And when I moved to Lincoln 50 years ago and met Paul Beaver, he made it live for me because he always talked about Abraham Lincoln as if, you know, you remember him. He lived right down the street here.
Well, he lived with Paul.
like he really knew
to
him.
this day, he still lives.
Yes. Yes.
The amount of information that Mr. Beaver knows on not only Abraham Lincoln but Logan County is just astounding. It's amazing.
Oh yeah. I was talking to him after church Sunday, and he was telling me about a big meeting at the Presbyterian Church 150 years ago that they had, and who was there, and a Confederate general spoke.
Yep. I remember hearing about that a little bit.
Did you notice how she slipped that in? She made us aware of the fact she was in church.
Well, Tom was there.
I was going to say, I can vouch for it.
He can vouch for me.
Slick move, Judith.
Well, it's just, there's neat things about just parts of history and how it's connected here. I'm sure you've seen, it's the Brown book, that pictorial history of Lincoln and Logan County. I think Paul Beaver and Paul Gleason possibly.
Yes.
There's a picture in there. It's one of my favorite pictures. It is a horse-drawn, not a horse-drawn carriage, but they're actually taking, it's the last Civil War veteran of Logan County. It's right around 1940.
A hearse?
It passed away. And it's right in front of the drive that goes into University Hall. There's nobody on the road. There's new snow on the ground. So it's just this really beautiful picture of just the two different times in history kind of connecting at that moment. But it's really a neat picture.
Have you had any, you know, you're kind of a new kid on the block, so to speak, Tom, with this position you have now. Have you had any surprises? Anything you've uncovered that really kind of say, well, I didn't know about that?
Well, I'm still learning, and I think this is what's helped is that I understand I have a pretty steep learning curve, and I've also learned I'm not a historian. My background is in marketing and fundraising, and I had many times when I first took the position, I mean, following in the footsteps of the likes of Ron Keller and Paul Beaver. I mean, these are true historians and scholars of Lincoln, and I'm still learning, and I could never, you know, assume to say that I'll get to that level, but you know, there's quite a bit to learn, but it's just there's been a lot to learn regarding the marketing parts because we would, for instance, on Highway 55, right by the Williamsville exit, we have our first billboard. It's up now. It's on the left when you're driving north towards Lincoln, and we have been trying to get out to the community, to different groups and organizations to reintroduce the museum as well. So there's things to learn every single day, but that's what keeps it exciting.
That's what keeps you going.
Absolutely.
You mustn't be apologetic about learning every day. Heck, you're younger than my kids. And I'm older than my kids.
Sure.
And I still try to learn something don't I, Bill?
Nope. Remember Andy Knotts?
Yes.
Seriously. Raising of money is a pretty sophisticated. I'm talking now in this capacity, not personally. Well, that's sophisticated too. But raising of money for a museum or something in that category, that's a pretty sophisticated business. There are a lot of little nuances.
It is
a lot of little makes or breaks.
It is, and it's one of the things that I try to do when I'm talking to someone who may be interested in giving to the museum is I want to make sure that I tell the story of the museum and how we're trying to honor and preserve the life and legacy of Abraham Lincoln and where the funds go. Because many times when someone wants to give money, they want to know, well, what is this going to help? And so that's why when we talk about the conservational efforts and what happens in the vault and our educational outreach and the students who come in and things to that idea. So I want people to feel good when they give to the Lincoln Heritage Museum. I want them to feel good about it, that they're doing really something good, not just for the museum, but for the community as well.
And for the long term.
Absolutely.
It's not just for this year.
Oh, no, we're not going anywhere. And there's new programs that we're trying to build as well. We're trying to build, for instance, a lecture series that's going to start this summer. We're going to be doing in June Mrs. Lincoln's Strawberry Party. It's going to be a free event to the public, and it's for people of all ages, but mainly for children. Where Anne, who is a certified living history interpreter, will be Mary Lincoln. And Mary Lincoln was known, strawberries were known to be her favorite, one of her favorite foods. And so we're going to have games for the kids and different things like that. But a lot of it is just to get people to see what's here and maybe learn a little bit about the life of Lincoln.
Oh, that would be such a good thing. Kids would love that. And how lucky for the kids who will be there to start loving history when they're little instead of waiting until they move to Lincoln.
Yeah, and that's
Like
those are events like that are the things that I try to stress when I speak to potential donors about here's what we're trying to do, and then of course it's up to the person if they want to donate or not. I want to make sure that they are happy, that if they donate money, when they walk away, they feel good about it, that they're helping do something very good for not only the students but for the community in general.
I applaud that approach. You know, there are outfits that call you on the phone, for instance,
Right.
and they want to know if you couldn't just give $25 or even $10, you know, and you think, well, how much of that actually goes to this cause,
Sure.
and how much of it is?
Yeah, we've
For the
all seen that graph which shows on the major charities what goes for administration, what actually goes to the charity, and those are important graphs to look at. It occurs to me, Tom, that in this great community of Logan County, that a lot of folks, particularly when they get it where I am, and the age and so forth, might have a lot of, maybe not a lot, but one or two books or artifacts or something that's been in their family for years, and they're not sure just exactly what the heck to do with them. Their progeny don't care for them, or they don't have any children at all. So it would be advisable for them to think and consider giving those.
Absolutely.
And you can evaluate them, and they either have value for us or they don't.
Well, and this is actually something I've learned as being the director. If someone had a book, for instance, like you're saying, we can't put a value on it, because if someone wants to donate, let's just say a book, somebody else has to actually put the value. Many times the donor, or if it's over a certain amount of money, I believe they have to find a third party to actually put that amount, because then they're able to, for tax purposes, able to take right off their donation. So that's why we at the museum are not able to put an amount on that. But we are always welcome phone calls or visits if somebody has something they're interested in giving to the museum. We're always, and I would direct that person to talk directly with Anne, because Anne makes those types of decisions on if this is something that would go in our vault, or perhaps it may go to a different museum where it fits that theme a little bit better. So either way.
Well, history is, as I said earlier, it's a shame you have to get old to appreciate history.
Absolutely.
And I think, generally speaking, that's somewhat the truth, don't you, Judith? That as youngsters in school, it's just something we have to do. Very few youngsters that were in school with me were really steeply involved in history.
Well, I'm hoping that by expanding the Civil War walk idea, I know that the teachers at Northwest and Washington Monroe Central, the schools who came to that, they did a wonderful job, and it really did seem like the students were excited to be there, and which is so exciting for us too, to have children in the museum and they're excited to be there.
Oh, you'll be repeating that, won't you?
Absolutely, and I'm really hoping that we're able to reach some of the other schools as well, and do something similar. Maybe it wouldn't be the same day; we'd do a different day, but something similar, because it's a great way for the kids to get excited about learning about history. And we're right there in town. I do understand how schools have budgets and they can be strained on going on field trips. Well, this is right across town, so like I said, this is just a gem in the community, and I'd love for the entire public really to take advantage of what we have.
If you haven't been there, you're missing out on something. You better get there.
Absolutely.
Tom, we appreciate your time this morning with us. You're, Tom McLaughlin, Director of Lincoln College Heritage Museum. We're just sitting here visiting about this wonderful museum we have here on the Lincoln College campus. Open daily. What are the hours here, Mr. McLaughlin?
The hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., Saturdays, 1 to 4 p.m. And if anyone has any questions, our phone number is 217-735. Oh, no, I forgot our number there. 735-7399.
7399.
And it is in the phone book.
It is. And you can always look up lincolncollege.edu and click on Lincoln Heritage Museum, and that has all of our information as well.
Yeah, that's the neat part about the internet. Gain loads of information on that before you ever go.
Yeah, we're in the process of revamping our website, but it has, like you said, it has a bunch of our information. It has our calendar of events, really some of the neat things we have out there. It talks about the new exhibit this year. So I highly encourage anyone to check it out and come and see us.
Thank you very much, Tom McLaughlin.
Thank you so much.
We always try to close the Viewpoint program, Tommy, with a quote that hopefully germane to the subject matter of the morning. And I found one that essentially says, it takes a special kind of a person to go to a museum and another one to stay. Thank you for Viewpoint.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead.